good panel talking about a subject which has been very high on the agenda for MAAG and its members during COVID, which is how are we all going to go back to work and what are we going to do with our properties? This is not going to be a conversation about shall we, shan't we have office space. This is going to be about reimagining the workplace. And I'm delighted to have Lee Daniels, who is Global Product Manager for Workspace for JLL, or Jones Lang LaSalle, who are large property agents across the world, and he looks after Europe. And JLL have done some research of over 5,000 companies, looking in terms of how they're doing, and has experience in places like Paris and Milan, who are ahead of us on the COVID curve. So he'll talk about how those markets have responded. I've got Joseph Mishon, yes, a family member, but he's head of expansion for Kitt. And Kitt are an interesting company in that they reimagine office space. You go to them and you say, this is what we want to do with the space. They will reimagine it. You can see what it looks like through VR expression, and then they will make it all happen for you. So there's going to be a fair amount of reimagining of existing space, and Joseph will give you a perspective on that. And then finally, we've got a good friend of MAAG's, Cris Cicirello, who is Senior Vice President to Wasserman. And Wasserman have got some great space in Aldwych, and they are looking to share some of that space going forward, because I think they're one of those companies that realize they might not need all the space that they've got. And he's going to give a perspective of how he is looking at their whole office space going forward. So there's a real live example. So each of those are going to talk for a few minutes in terms of their perspective, and then I'm hoping that we can turn this into a conversation. So as many of you who can go on camera so I can see you and maybe call upon you, that will be helpful. So I'm going to start with Lee, and maybe you can start by talking about JLL's experience and how you see things moving forward.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Clive, and good afternoon to everyone. So we've been living in some really unprecedented times. And what I can say is that ultimately, let's face it, working from home has been extremely successful, and perhaps more successful than many had originally expected. And in some respects, there's been some real sort of material benefits with working from home. Some of them sort of top benefits being that there's been less or no commute, the level of flexibility it presents in terms of hours, and the enhanced sort of work-life balance that it's provided. However, it has also had its challenges. And with some workforce demographics sharing that ultimately what they have found is it stifles creativity. They felt that their home working environments were perhaps not conducive enough to work from home permanently, because they're missing social interaction, them serendipity moments, and obviously because of family distractions and perhaps not having the ability to work in different spaces. And therefore, really, as a result of the challenges associated with working from home, where it does work for some and it doesn't work for others, it brings into light in terms of reimagining what the office of the future needs to be. And where it doesn't work for most, and some do want lots of levels of flexibility, both from working from home and in the office is far from finished. However, its purpose will absolutely need to change. And you have to remember that the office has long provided a place for people to be able to do concentrative work. And increasingly has been a place to enable people to collaborate, connect, innovate, and socially interact. And the desire for them former characteristics have not changed. And the reason why I say that is, as Clive alluded to earlier, we have conducted a large survey spanning a wide variety of employees globally. which was conducted at the sort of end of April 2020 across 10 countries, spanning all industries, looking at 70% employed by multinationals and 30% employed by small to medium-sized enterprises. In terms of the respondents, 58% were male, 42% female, and the demographics ranged from 18 up to 65 plus, with 50% being managers and then 50% being individual contributors. And the reason for me sharing you all of that is because our research shows that now and in the future, an organisation's success and ability to innovate will still largely depend on face-to-face interaction, in-person collaboration and serendipity. What's more, most people either can't or don't want to work entirely remotely. Therefore, the office will remain an irreplaceable source of human connection and inspiration, and a place where conditions and enables people to innovate. Going back to where working from home, there is a perspective that, and from some of the research, that it is stifling creativity. So with that, almost 2/3 of employees missed their office from the survey that we conducted, which basically discloses that most employees, i.e. 6 out of 10, missed their office substantially during lockdown. But this does play out differently across different industries and demographics. And to give you some examples, tech workers, as an example, 69% showed a greater longing to return to the office, probably reflecting the sort of exciting workplace environments they already have. They already sit in sort of the workplace 4.0 bucket, and more innovative than perhaps, let's say, the legal sector for sure, and the financial services sector. In addition to that, a high proportion of young professionals also missed their office, 65% in total. Compared to other generations, they felt less supported actually through this crisis by their managers, and really struggled to contribute in the same way that they have previously. And these findings really demonstrate that both in the office and remote work and in person, as well as digital interactions, must form complementary components of the future workplace. The other sort of most missed elements of the office from our research is, again, that socializing piece. We had 44% on average come through with that socializing with colleagues element being missed, 30% from under 35s, and actually 54% from over 50s. Collective sort of face-to-face work on average, we got a metric of around 29%. Under 35's metric was 28%, and over 50's was 34%. In terms of the sort of informal communications, that water cooler conversation, that them happy collisions, let's say, on average, we're saying 25% on average were saying that they missed them. Over 50's, 29%, under 35's, 22%. Most were saying, going back to where perhaps they didn't feel their home environments were conducive, or they were being distracted too often. An environment that helps them to focus on the job, on average 23% come back and said that this was missed, with the under 35s being higher in terms of 25%, and over 50, 70%. And then there's the other bits and pieces around the ergonomics of the workstation and facilities that they have in home, and actually the possibility of working in different spaces when we start to think of activity-based working environments and neighbourhood choice environments that some provide. And obviously you could be restricted and confined to one space from working from home. And on average, in terms of the ergonomics, 21% was coming through that was missed, and then 14% respectively in terms of working into different spaces. So therefore, ultimately for me, there will actually be an ongoing evolution of the office, and we must not forget that. I think if you think of the predictions following the sort of 9/11 event, that no one would ever want to live or work at the top of sort of high-rise buildings ever again, and that our cities of the future would absolutely look vastly different. Certainly the security experience changed considerably, for sure, but what I would say is, moving forward almost 2 decades, our cities have not fundamentally changed. nor has the desirability of our office or residential at the top of sort of skyscrapers. If I think of One Hyde Park in London, in Mayfair, them high-rise flats, that's certainly let out. And often real estate comes with a price tag to match them views. So the COVID-19 pandemic has been another sort of unforeseen shock to our world with sort of far-reaching consequences. There will be inevitably a correction in the short term, like there is with any sort of, let's face it, we're in an economic downturn, and space is often shifted in economic downturns. And through that, over the long term, I believe the office will remain a fundamental part of really company culture and will play an essential role, certainly in when I start to think about agencies, that creativity and that innovation that's required, and to ensure that our essential role in sort of work and productivity. That is not to say offices and working lives will go unchanged. Working from home, as I said earlier, has been a proven success. Technology has stood us up, and it has highlighted to many people there are multiple benefits to both parties incorporating this flexibility, both workforce and businesses alike. Office space still has a pivotal role to play in facilitating that sort of essential face-to-face activity that are not easily replicated online. I know there's perhaps circa around 60 people, I can't see all 60 as an example. Onboarding new staff, training and mentoring are all essential for career progression and maintaining a productive workforce. Additionally, office provides a space for people to come together, collaborate, as I mentioned earlier, and pushes boundaries to really provide a fresh impetus for business growth. And not forgetting, for some of the office is a place of concentration and keeping work life and family life, having them sort of clear delineation, boundary lines, so that obviously you've got that sort of mindfulness breakaway from actually working in the office and then going home and enjoying your family. So the office itself may change, and it will absolutely change. It will change in the sense that it will have to be reflective of companies' business strategies and the purpose that they want the office to fulfill, and ultimately what the workforce want the office to fulfill, for sure. And its look and feel will change when we start to think about millennials and Generation Z, where they're looking for companies that really have sort of high sort of sustainability programs. And if you're using sustainable building fabrics in terms of design that support the neurodiverse community, so that all companies are hitting their respective D&I agendas as well. But the office of the 1990s, with the individual cubicles, workspaces with sort of limited communal facilities, is not recognizable today, right? So we've seen that our spaces have already changed, and they will change again, but they will just change for the right purpose to be reflective of the company's direction. So that's my view in terms of the office, and obviously sharing with you some of the research that we've seen. But in terms of across EMEA and what we've also witnessed is in various countries, certainly in Germany, who have had a real head start in terms of returning back to the office. Most in Germany started to return sort of back end of April, and some of the organisations that I'm talking with, and also when I look at our organisation, are operating at around about sort of 60% capacity. They've had a sort of different social distancing measure to us here in the UK. They were operating at sort of 1.5 metres right from the outset, where we were operating at 2. And they are really following the sort of strict social distancing measures. But actually, Germany have got it under control, and people are in the office, people are enjoying the office environment, but there is part of the workforce still working from home. I Adding to that, when I start to think about France, they sort of started to open sort of mid-May time. Social distancing measures again in France were very different to the UK from the outset. It was 1 metre right from the outset. And actually they've got a sort of mandatory sort of mask wearing policy as well. But on average, certainly what I'm hearing and seeing is most organisations are back at sort of average occupancy levels, which were pre-COVID. So that's really interesting to hear and see and understand. And then there's the Nordics, and nothing's really changed in the Nordics. And I had a really interesting conversation with Spotify recently, and Daniel Eck, who's a co-founder of Spotify, was saying to me, "Well, what are you talking about, Lee? Nothing's changed here. Here's the situation normal." And it's interesting actually that organisation itself are very firmly in that sort of really innovative workplace, that they've already created very innovative workplace environments. So for them, there's no real change, as well as other companies. And then across other sort of countries in Europe, most are back up to operating at anything from around sort of 25 to 35% in capacity, which is that sort of just below slightly the average peak occupancy of any sort of real estate building, which we used to always say would anything be between 45 to 55% anyhow. So what it has shown is that that those countries that have already opened up, the offices space is definitely being used. Are discussions underway in terms of reimagining that space so it's more fit for purpose for the collective workforce and the people that they're trying to attract and retain? Absolutely. But what I would say is that the office is absolutely not dead, but it will be repurposed.
Thank you, Lee. That's been really helpful, and I think a fantastic support for the office environment, which might suggest that we're all talking about these things, and whilst things might change, they might not change as much as we think. So I'll come to Joseph, who's looking at a slightly different in terms of genuinely reimagining the space and some of his experiences. So Joseph, over to you.
Great, thank you. Hi all. So as a business at Kitt, what we set out to do is that we would work with mostly small, medium-sized businesses in the tech, creative, media, and sort of arts world. And we would say to them, what kind of office is it that you want? We would go and find that office. We would then design it for them: seats, meeting rooms, breakout areas, furniture, everything that goes into that office. But then crucially, once they were in the space, we would manage it for them on an ongoing basis. And this was something that we had done with reasonable success. We were busy placing all different types of businesses across London. And then over the last 3 months, obviously, there's been a huge spotlight on this thing called the office. And one of our big selling points when we used to approach these businesses was making the office feel like an emotional purchase or an emotional decision. It was amazing how many businesses used to treat their office and their real estate as a bit of an afterthought. Yes, it was a huge cost base after your staff. It was probably the largest single item on your balance sheet. But the sort of lack of emotion and attachment to these places was something that really struck us. So we wanted to inject a bit more feeling into the whole process. If you were buying a house, you wouldn't just do one viewing and then move your whole family there. You'd really sort of interrogate the area, interrogate the building, think about what designs you wanted to put into the space. And we thought there was a way you could do that with offices. And I think, the last 3 or 4 months have forced us to think really carefully about what we're doing, but also listening to all of the occupiers out there. And whilst we don't have as big a data set as Lee and the JLL guys, we have been speaking to probably 400 or 500 different businesses that have been in our database to try and listen to what their thoughts are. I think a few things have come out really strongly. Is that the first is the planning horizons for businesses have just totally changed. Businesses could plan 3, 4, 5, maybe even 10 years in advance and have a rough idea of how many people they think they're going to have, what kind of revenue targets they might have, and a general kind of steer on where that business is going to be. And what we've seen is that those horizons and those planning timeframes are completely out of kilter now. No one really knows what their business is going to look like in January next year, let alone in January 2025. So with that in mind, how that's impacted their office search or their decisions around real estate is that everything has become much more short-term and everyone is trying to act really quickly. The second thing that we've seen is people's ideas of what the office is everyone has a very different view. Depending if you're in the creative industry or if you're in finance or if you're in law, that space has a totally different meaning to you now than it did 3 or 4 months ago. And taking the time to figure that out properly before you make a decision and sign up to a new office or release your old one is something that we're working through with lots of different businesses. And I'd say there's probably 3 or 4 things that we're certain of. The first is that flexibility and not being tied into a long-term agreement, be that 3, 4, or 5 years and above, is more relevant now than it ever has been. As I said, if you can't plan what your business is going to look like in next summer, how could you sign a 5-year lease or a 10-year lease? So a trend of occupiers looking for shorter term, more flexible options where the penalties for releasing early or exiting early aren't as high is definitely top of the bill. The second thing is looking at less space. So if you have unfortunately had to make some headcount changes or there is a big kind of work from home element that you're going to retain, you are not going to need as much space as you were before, but it's how that space is made up, which is what's really important. I'll come to that in a sec. And the third is the format of the office. So this is a school of thought which to say our office is all about meeting clients and doing our sort of deal closing moments. There's another school of thought that says it's all about collaboration, training, and socializing. And then there's a third, which is it's for concentration, as Lee was saying. This is where our high-performing staff members come in and do excellent work, and then they can go home and sort of get back to their private lives. And depending on what the businesses think of those 3 schools of thought, how your offices are going to look and how they're going to be made up is going to be impacted. And the final one, which is probably that's only come out in the last month or so, what we're seeing is that if people are going to take a space and they're going to actually commit to something for the next year or 2, they really want that space to be managed for them. And there's a couple of reasons. The first is it needs to be safe. So ensuring that everything is COVID secure, all the desks are spaced out in the right way, the cleaning regime is 2 or 3 times a day, all of the lifts are being sanitized every 3 hours. All of these small operational challenges, which if you were managing your own space would cause you a serious headache, occupiers are now seeing the benefit of having an operator like us or like many others that are doing it, really taking that pain away from them and making sure they have a safe place, which is minimum fuss, low disruption for the team, and which means that they can just focus on their core business. So those 3 or 4 bits of insight have been coming through quite strongly. And what we're trying to do is help businesses visualize their spaces. We were using virtual reality as a really interesting medium to help businesses understand what a space fully fitted out with furniture and meeting rooms looks like when effectively you're standing in a quasi building site. And that visual reality is part of the emotional journey. It helps them picture their business there when it's going to be ready, and really sort of gets around them committing any money or any significant capex without them being 100% certain that's the format of the building they want. And for us, I would agree with everything that Lee said. The office isn't dead; it's just totally different. And there's a few different concepts that we're working through on, which might be interesting to agencies and creative businesses. The first is the office share. So we're working on a few buildings where an occupier would take the space Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then a second occupier would take the space Thursday, Friday. And they would use that space for whatever means they like. It could be meetings, it could be training, it could be collaborative work, whatever it might be. But crucially, they're effectively only paying for half the month or half the working week. And there are some sort of legal complexities around that at the moment, but we're pretty sure that in the next month, we're going to have a solution as to how that could work. And for that is really interesting because it makes the work from home, keeping an office debate not all or nothing. You can actually have a world where you have both, and it won't financially impact your business as much as before. And I think if more landlords and more asset owners can adopt this and be more open to that process, I think we're going to see more businesses retaining some kind of space. The second thing is meeting rooms, or treating a floor of offices as a sort of huge meeting and collaboration space. You know, we've heard dozens of times, potentially even hundreds of times, that client meetings where you have to sign something off, close a deal, pitch an idea, they just cannot be done through the screen. You can do your pre-meetings and you can warm them up as much as you like, but if you're looking to have a decision made, you still need to see the whites of the eyes of the people over the table. And so treating an office space and turning it into high-class meeting room facilities is something we're exploring. And there are a number of businesses that want to do that with their existing space, whilst everyone kind of adjusts to the work from home reality. And then the third model is satellite offices. So the slightly larger occupiers that might have 100+ staff, they're looking at retaining very small offices of 20 to 30 desks, let's say, just for teams to go in there and do project work. The rest of the business will continue to work from home and then come in where necessary. And these spaces, being a third of the size of what they would have had before, obviously costing them far less than they were previously, and they're a little bit more nimble for their needs. So we believe there is a role for the office. There's lots of thinking to be done, lots of work to be done. We are just here to try and help occupiers think about it in the right way and bring them on the journey. And if they do want to take something, then again, we can be their partners in helping them find that. And the final thing is just a bit on the creative industry. And we've worked with lots of agencies, lots of ad tech companies, digital marketing companies. And the main thing that came out loud and clear was these are very young workforces. You know, the average age is probably 26, 27 years old in an agency. And the office for that sector of your company it's not just the four walls with a desk and a computer. It's much more. It really is an extension of your social life. I spent the first 7 or 8 years of my career in agencies, and I was in the office all day and all night sometimes. And it was a really core part of my life. I had great friends in the agency. I had great friends in agencies that were nearby. And there was something about that building and that center that really kind of held everything together in your early to mid 20s. And those businesses that have a number of people in that category cannot immediately reject the notion of an office for the sake of the culture and the happiness and well-being of the staff. And we did a little survey, and we got resounding results that something like 60 to 70% of all occupiers would require an office in some sense, just to satisfy and to keep morale up for their team. So that was decision makers and C-suite saying, we need to have this just to make sure that our team and our staff don't get disenfranchised with the business. If you've ever brought on new members of staff over the last few months, at Kitt, we had a couple of people join the team, and it was a difficult process, embedding those new joiners into your company, making sure they understand the values, the processes, the way that we all work as a team. And again, doing that through a screen on various Zoom calls has been nigh on impossible. And having a space and getting back to see each other face to face has been crucially important. So in summary, there's a lot happening. I would say no one is 100% sure where the industry is going to rest. We are seeing about 40 to 50 businesses come to us every week and say, we're looking for something, or we're thinking of our office in a totally different way. Might you be able to help? And I think between now and Christmas, I can't see the city centres being totally full again. And hopefully as the year turns, people who have made their decisions, design their office, fit it out in a way that suits their business, and then they can start kickstarting their businesses again in these buildings that we used to call offices.
Perfect. Thank you, Joseph. That's given a number of routes as to how offices can be reimagined, particularly if you're looking to reduce the amount of space and have it as I know some people are looking at in terms of a clubhouse, whereas people kind of drop in. And I'd like to call on Chris, who's right in the midst of a property issue for Wasserman. They are looking at less space and how he's trying to tackle it. And from an agency point of view, a real life example. So Chris.
Thanks, Clive. Thanks for inviting me along. So as Clive mentioned, Cris Cicirello from Wasserman. brand partnership and activation agency as regards the MAAG, but the other half of our business globally sees us looking after loads of amazing athletes, celebrity and cultural talent. So split needs in some ways, but very similar in others, and certainly echoing a lot of the points that Lee and Joseph have mentioned on here. I'll give you a bit of background, whether it qualifies me to be on here or not. Started agency journey in the early 2000s with 4 rented desks in Isleworth, courtesy of Perspective Red Cell, which was absolutely lovely, and the chance to go to the pub on a Friday afternoon by the river. We then moved up to some serviced offices in Hammersmith as we begin to grow, and took on 8 desks there. We then took the big step of moving into Margaret Street, which is just off Regent Street, to our first grown-up office, or it felt grown up at the time. Then we outgrew that and got another one just up the road, again on Margaret Street, until we ended up in our current home in Aldwych with 23,000 square feet, split over 2 floors. Together with the athlete division, we take the whole of the 7th floor and probably about a third of the 6th floor in Aldwych House. We absolutely love it. It's a fantastic place to welcome guests, and of course, as Lee and Joseph mentioned, to attract the best talent and in some ways the best clients, you've got to have a fantastic home to welcome them into, and that's not going anywhere anytime soon. I've been on various MAAG calls and other groups over the past few months, and hopefully some of the points that I'm going to raise are representative of what all of us have been talking about. But if you disagree or have missed anything, please do shout or butt in at any time. I'm not going to be quite as detailed as the chaps were, but I've got a few points that maybe we've all been discussing. So space is key, as I've said. Clients love it, colleagues love it. Certainly on the athlete side, it's very important to be able to welcome some of the world's best athletes and sportsmen to a fantastic home, so they realise they're being looked after properly. That's not going anywhere, as is secret underground car parking. Having said that, the COVID situation for us has really accelerated, if you like, maybe 5 or 6 years worth of decision making, and our office isn't going anywhere soon, I've said that, but it has allowed us to rethink and reimagine how we use our money and how we use spaces. Having, as I said, taken our first offices in Isleworth nearly 20 years ago, and knowing exactly how much they cost at the time and what they do now compared to what we're spending in central London, there's definitely a case for reimagining where we need those central locations compared to where we might need an outside location. We also have a stunning warehouse, which is about 100 years old, just near Heathrow Terminal 5, which I love because it costs about £7 a square foot. But so, isn't that right, Lee? We're doing deals for that moving forward. But having said that, there is absolutely a case for revisiting where we spend our big money in a central location compared to perhaps a halfway house, compared to somewhere like the warehouse, which also has office space, as well as, of course, this great new ability for teams to work from home. So we're having to think about that. More and more members of our teams over the last 2 or 3 years, maybe even a bit more, if I'm honest, have been talking to us about flexible working, and we've been working out how best to respond to that. Certainly as regards they themselves and the best way for them to work, but also then how we respond in terms of the space that we've got in our beautiful central London location. Definitely over calls with the MAAG groups and others over the last few months, I think it's definitely fair to say that there was a lack of certainty from senior leaders about how productivity and effectiveness would work. But as I said, COVID's really accelerated that, and I think it's a massive credit to all of our teams that they have just pivoted and embraced the new ways of working. And if anything, productivity and effectiveness has grown. almost to the detriment of home lives. So that's another matter that we're working on, and wellness and things like that, and making sure people know they can turn off their computers and go to the pub now. But that's also got massive repercussions as regards how we consider our office spaces, and the fact that people do work so well remotely, as well, of course, being a creative industry, needing to get together for those crucial moments. So those are just some of the things that we've been thinking about. We are acting on them. We are possibly looking to bring in other people or sublet our 6th floor space. There's also talk, given Casey Wasserman, our founder's absolute passion for diversity and inclusion, in possibly just giving away some of that space to some groups that might not otherwise be able to afford it, and letting them have a central location themselves. So, there's lots of things going on at the moment, but it's kind of a little wrap up of where we are, if that's okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Look, we've seen quite a wide range of views and some of the imagination. And clearly the office is here to stay, but maybe not as we know it. I'd like to call upon Dan Noy from ThinkJam, because ThinkJam are a business that have actually, during all this, in both their offices in London and Los Angeles, have been able to get rid of their space and are adopting a work from anywhere approach. And I just wondered, when Dan, you could talk through what that means, and based upon the conversations that the presentations that Joseph, Chris and Lee have made about the importance of social interaction and all that, how ThinkJam are going to address that going forward.
Sure. I mean, I will be honest, we're in the middle of it. We're still trying to figure things out. But there's a lot going on. I think, just listening to what everyone's just said, I think the term office itself, it just needs a bit of redefining. I think it's about having the right space for the right types of interaction. And so we, circumstances of COVID and work and so on, it was a decision that was fairly quick and easy for us to make. The not irony, which is our CEO had been talking about having this policy for years, and there'd been such resistance from having a kind of a general work from anywhere policy. But as Chris said, we'd had increasingly more flexible working requests over the last few years. And then we found that we had quite a lot of our workforce, we had based in London, but then having people in Bristol, in Sheffield, in Manchester, in Birmingham, in Norfolk. We had people who, for their own personal life, have moved around. And we didn't want to lose those people, and found that it worked really well. With COVID, the irony is, I think it's been articulated, I think we've been much more productive, more creative, faster, more efficient. We've worked much better as a team. People got to know each other better than when they were sitting next to each other. Now, part of that is because we're in a crisis, right? And there is a big difference between being at home, trying to work in a crisis, versus this being your place at work. But when we've spoken to our teams, as has been articulated, it's culture is the main thing that is the fear. How are we going to? What are we going to lose in culture? How are we going to need to have those moments? And I think a working from anywhere policy does not mean for us not ever being in person. I think, as everyone's already stated, it's an irreplaceable dynamic. But how and when it happens, and whether it needs to be every day of your life or every day of your week, I think we've seen from our short experience in the world of COVID that it's not to a wider detriment. I think was it Joseph, you made the comment on trying to onboard someone remotely, which, yeah, absolutely, but you just don't need to be spending 20 grand a month on an office just for the occasional onboarding. It's about, trying to say, yes, we can create the right space, the right interactions, So we do feel going to need a hub. We need some space, whether it's memberships, it's looking at what the office is. It's about having spaces that we can use, but not necessarily using it as an office, and saying, okay, what are the spaces we need as a business to interact, look at our people's wellness and welfare. And a lot of that we're getting from our staff. I think being in this situation is not about us sitting in a room with your senior leadership team trying to dictate how this could work. We've been getting it more and more, in terms of surveys and talking directly to people. What do you need? What are you experiencing in your home life? Because everyone's got a very different experience. And so it's about trying to learn from them about the challenges they're facing and how we meet them. And that's what we're in the middle of at the moment. Literally just before this call, I was on for an hour and a half going through our potential kind of wellness and culture activities to make sure that people feel part of a unit. I'm sure many of your businesses, everyone here, we all like to refer to ourselves as families. I know we do. How do you maintain that family dynamic? But our team have got such brilliant ideas, and everyone's really enthusiastic. I'm sure we'll have a few people drop off. I think it's once things open up, there are going to be definitely people who don't want to be part of a working from home culture, or working from anywhere culture. But the difference is, if we're going to look at this going forward as our identity, then anyone new we hire are going to be buying into that. I've rambled a lot there. I wasn't expecting to talk, so I just kind of come out there. But it's all very fresh.
Okay, that's really, really good. I can see peers in my site, and kind of got a quite interesting approach to how they're looking at their property. Could you give us more details, Piers?
Yeah, I can indeed. Hello, everyone, this afternoon. Lovely to see everybody. Actually, I'm in the office today, which is probably the first time for 15 weeks. And actually, I'm not alone. There's one other person here, Steve in the background. But I think, yeah, we've started to think quite differently about our office space, having spent probably a lot of money doing it up like a lot of people and trying to create this a very bespoke social environment. Having done a survey a couple of weeks ago to the whole team, and with 50% of the team has said that they're not keen to come back into the office for the rest of the year. I think we need to look at how we use our space going forward. And I think you mentioned it earlier, Clive, when you were talking about the clubhouse mentality. And I think that sounds quite appealing to us, in as much as I think we will probably end up operating remotely by default, but then try and build this sort of hub destination, which we can use as a sort of core pillar in our culture. We're still very much in the early days of trying to work out what that means and how we do that. But to us, it feels like the natural next step.
Piers, I just want to say that it's what you're saying is resonating with what we're doing. And I think just something you said at the beginning, which is about your staff not feeling comfortable to come in. We did the same survey. So many people weren't comfortable to come in. But equally, I don't know if other people are experiencing this. We've got clients as well. They don't want to go into their offices. They don't want to have meetings. We've had international clients who don't want to meet Brits because we're worse than they are. And so, when we look at our own offices, it's looking at in the round, about everyone's offices and everyone we're liaising with. And it's not just our own work environment. If everyone's feeling uncomfortable, the whole ecosystem has to change in terms of all our relationships.
Lee, I saw on CNN your CEO talking about the reimagined office space, and he was actually saying that some of your clients are actually requiring more space than less space. Part of me would say he would say that, wouldn't he? But one of the very valid reasons I can see is the need for social distancing and people being concerned and wanting to have more space around them than not. Can you talk to that in terms of whether that, maybe Joseph can add to that as well, whether social distancing is going to be part of the way in which offices need to be imagined again?
Yeah, certainly, Clive. Yeah, so absolutely. I've witnessed it myself in terms of clients requesting for more space, and it was mainly around the social distancing measures. So we were doing a lot of different social distancing plans for them to get companies across certainly Europe in a ready state. Now, I think that that's obviously to ensure that those companies' workforces are health and well-being of the staff and safety of staff is at the forefront of the mind, and that's why it was being done by companies in the pharmaceutical and biotech sector, as well as the financial services sector as well, was where mainly then requests were coming through. But the reality is that that's in the short and medium term. So it depends how you want to look at reimagine. I think there's a reimagined state for the short and medium term for sure, where social distancing measures come into play. And then I think there's reimagine in the long term when such time a suppressant for COVID comes into play, or actually a vaccination, where people can start to really look at. I've been hearing some of the things here, some hub and club concepts. We have a hub and club concept model actually that certainly I can share and share more on. But the reality is once there is a vaccine, that's when experiences, because a lot of people want different experiences. Joseph actually said a real great point earlier, which really resonated with me in terms of the actual environment of the future, because if we think about the liquid workforce that's at play, and we think about environments rather than calling them offices to someone, I think Daniel's point earlier, and we call it environments or spaces, it makes it more fluid, right? And therefore, with the word environment, I think for me, the environments will have to create experiences to enable people to be an extension of their lives, to enable them to socialize, connect, and learn, and wow and inform clients and colleagues alike. And therefore, that's in the longer term though, because you can't really start to truly collaborate and truly create experiences and experiential services until such time there is a presence. So that's why absolutely why our CEO would have said, because that's absolutely what we are witnessing. But I do believe that's in the short and medium term until such time there is a suppressant at play.
All right. Let us ask the question of the property professionals. What's the future of the likes of the co-working spaces like WeWork in this? Because a number of our members have been working in a WeWork space. Is it going to be more of that or less? Joseph?
Difficult to say now. I mean, they have stopped their aggressive expansion plans for the meantime. And what we've been hearing from occupiers is, you know, the notion of sharing a kitchen or a breakout space with 700 other people in a big WeWork in Old Street just feels a really big leap for people to make at the moment. You know, people are barely getting back on the trains into the office, let alone sharing lots of amenities with lots of people they might not know. So I think we are going to probably see a push from businesses that have 20 desks and above, who are in fully serviced WeWork style buildings, perhaps looking elsewhere and wanting to get a private space, which, you know, that could be a single floor, it could be half a floor, but something which is shared with less people that aren't within their bubbles or within their business communities. And I think if you look at the people under 20 desks, so these would be freelancers, small businesses that are in their first kind of few years of going, I think what we're seeing is that most of that segment has paused their memberships in these service buildings. They've cut their cost base immediately. And because they are tech savvy and they'll be digital natives, the notion of them working from their kitchen table for the next 6-12 months is not that scary. And I think that's the big distinction for us when we look at these businesses, is that when you have under 20 desks, this is a generalization, but I think it does make sense in the round. You're looking to kind of get your business going and start building your culture. And at that point in your journey, being in a co-working space where you could feed off the energy of others, you could tap into, you know, the coffee lounge and all the kind of amazing amenities around you, that makes a lot of sense at that point of your journey. But when you get to kind of 20 people and above, you're starting to want to build your own culture and start, having your own space where you can start doing your own things in private. And I feel like that distinction is going to be really important, where if you're a small business just getting going, you're more likely to stay away for a bit longer. And then the large businesses, which actually made up the lion's share of revenue for these large co-working operators, are potentially going to be looking at private options with a smaller price tag as well.
I suppose that kind of leads us into the question about long leases, or, the WeWorks, was about flexibility and having short leases, and maybe moving to smaller spaces and more private spaces might mean you're into a situation, longer term commitment. I suppose, Lee, in your area, where you might be representing landlords, how do we get around that?
Yeah, very good question. How do we get around that? Yeah, it's interesting. I'll share some experiences that I'm actually witnessing at the minute. Actually, for me, depending upon the size of business, certainly at an enterprise level, most are writing off space, right? Some are definitely writing off space to go into co-working space because they want that more flexibility. But obviously they're just that working out their cash flows and seeing the surrender liabilities and writing off for the landlords. Landlords themselves, in conversations with landlords, they know they have to create a new experience for the future to attract tenants to their office space. And this is where, in some respects, they are partnering with operators to create them flexible spaces within their own office blocks in order to attract the right tenant, and so that the tenants get strong covenant.
Question for you, then, Joseph, because you're a mixture between a WeWork and a leaseholder. How do businesses like ours get around this thing, which is about not making a long-term commitment in these sort of office spaces?
Yeah, no, and it's a good question. And I think the responsibility is going to fall on the shoulders of the landlord community to start being more flexible and listening to the demand side. I think, the last 10 years since 2008, 2009, the landlords really were in control. They were still demanding longer terms at pretty premium rents, which in the round they were getting. And we're seeing more landlords who aren't pension funds or large institutions slowly coming around to the idea of having someone in there for 18 months or 2 years is better than having it empty and marketing it for 2 years, of course. So all of our things that we market are under 3 years. So you can stay there for 1, 2, or 3 years. We try not to do less than 1 year, but you definitely need to do longer than 3. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think landlords are going to be faced with the possibility of having a floor empty for potentially 3, 4, 5 years, or welcoming occupiers to come in for a year, rebase their business, move on to the next thing. If they've upsized, that's great. If they've downsized, they'll go somewhere else, and start being a bit more flexible. And it's going to be a long process. The property world hasn't changed that much, particularly in offices for the last 20 or 30 years. But what I'm encouraged by is, as someone who's trying to do a new model here, is that 2008, 2009, which was an equally unprecedented time, the co-working phenomenon really came out of that whole world. There was a world full of freelancers and sole traders that were previously part of big businesses. They wanted somewhere to work, and this thing called the snazzy WeWorks were born and everything else. And I'm just hopeful that in the next year or the next 18 months, when we come through the other side of this, what will be the new model for offices? And it could be something like what we're doing. It could be something like what other people are doing. I really think there will be a new way. And Daniel's point of redefining the word office, that's exciting to me.
As we kind of come to the last 3 minutes, I suppose I'll try and sum up, because obviously we've had a number of calls and sessions around this subject. And I think one of the things that I've seen kind of come through is, one, leadership have recognized that working from home is not an all bad thing. Before all this, people saying working from home, that's all, no, you're not, you need to kind of come in. But I think companies now, leadership now recognizes that people can work remotely and they can be trusted to work remotely. And certainly in our Future Leaders group, we've heard things that by leadership giving people the option as to where they work has been will be very empowering in itself. which means that they don't need to go into the office every day if they're choosing to work remotely, but there's an office there for people to go into. And therefore, that seems to be a very good endorsement of there being an office space. And those people who have found it difficult to work from home, and we have to recognise that there are communities that have found it difficult because they might be flat sharing, sharing a kitchen, wherever it's going to be, fighting over the internet, has certainly been some concerns, which some leaders haven't necessarily experienced themselves because they're leading in larger premises and maybe even with outside space. So that's been a premium. So there does seem to be an endorsement. And I would say that if I've done some kind of rather bad market research, because it's only kind of dipstick of the market, it would seem that companies need perhaps around 50% of the space that they were having before. And that was really working on the basis that not everybody's going to be in at the same time, and therefore they need less space. And that kind of causes the reimagination. And I think Piers, in terms of what they've done there, in terms of the clubhouse as a way of people dropping in and having a friendly space, is a kind of a, for me, has been quite an inspiring way to look at it. And I think others might well seek that as well. So we have seen today on this call a very good support for the office, the fact that things will change, but maybe not as much as we thought they were going to change. And we've seen various different models kind of coming through as to how people are going to use the space that they've got. And Lee and both Lee and Joseph showed some kind of examples for that. So all it really means me at 2:59 with 1 minute to go is to thank Lee, Joseph, Chris, Dan Noy, Piers for their contributions. I hope everybody else has got a lot from this, and you elect to make the most of your office space, your property, your management of your P&L going forward, and that we can all get back to business as quickly as we can, as safely as we can. And on that, I'll say thank you very much indeed. Everyone have a good weekend. We'll be back next week with a whole series of new events. Terry will be sending out the email shortly for the MAAG range of activities. And exactly 3 o'clock on the dot. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Cheers.
Very good.